Welcome back, everybody, to Plan's 10-Minute Podcast. I am your host, Ryan Diver. The 10-Minute Podcast is your podcast for all things commercial and residential property related. I'm from Plan Companies, the nation's #1 building service provider for all things janitorial, security guard, front desk concierge, and maintenance services. And today, we're joined by a very special guest, David Meit from Oculus Realty. David, how are you doing today?
Good morning, Ryan. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. We're so glad to have you because, a lot of the times we don't get people on the podcast that have quite the experience and resume that you bring with you. For those who don't know, David has spent nearly 30 years at Oculus Realty. So sort of his perspective on the industry is one that I really wanted to touch base on. I guess going off of that, David, so what is things that you noticed recently in the industry that are becoming wants and needs for property managers?
Sure. Great question to start out with. And as you indicated, I've been in the business for over 30 years and have seen a lot of changes. And probably the #1 change that I've seen and that I really think is going to continue to be a trend is the use of technology, or as we like to call it, prop tech. In our business. And our industry has traditionally been relatively slow to adopt technology. We still had in multifamily people keeping ledger cards when computers were very much part of the business world. So we've seen a lot of use of technologies, a lot of great platforms. The advent of the internet has allowed information flow. It's made our jobs much easier from the site level to corporate accounting and everything else. And particularly also in the delivery of resident and tenant services. That's been a huge trend. One of the other trends that's a little more on the negative side is the fact that there seems to be less and less talented individuals coming into our industry. And the problem with property management, both commercial and residential, is that if we're doing our jobs right, nobody knows we exist. Because we do everything in the background. When you walk in the door of a building and you go and use the facilities and the doors open, the elevators work and the toilets flush, that's our job. That's what we do. And nobody ever thinks about it. But because of that, nobody ever thinks about this as a career. And although there are a couple of universities that do provide degrees in property management, most people like myself fall into the business. So with so much other competition, particularly in today's employment world, it's becoming harder and harder to find a lot of talent. And of course, the most important position that's been hard to find is trade talent, service managers, engineers, things like that. We've had a lot of influence in our society on STEM. Science and technology and engineering and math, that trades aren't at the highest level of responsibility or involvement as they used to be. And so that leads to those that aren't available to be our plumbers and our electricians and our janitorial staff and all the things that are really needed to maintain our built environment that we all participate in every day.
Yeah, I mean, going off of that, that's been a point of discussion for us, for the past, since the pandemic started, was just finding and acquiring talent and labor. Is there something that you've been able to become successful in when you're searching through staff and hiring processes of any kind of vendor?
Well, on the vendor side or our employee side?
Sort of. I mean, both. We could touch on.
Yeah. I think, and actually, this works for both. I think it's culture. It's attitude as much as it is aptitude. You can. It's hard to find nice people because you can train nice people pretty much in any skill set. It's hard to find people that aren't just great people persons. They may be very capable of doing something, but if you don't want to be around them and they're toxic to your customer or your fellow employees, it's not going to bode well for your organization. So both from when we hire, we have very specific guiding principles that we look for, and we interview for that. And it really goes the same way for when we look for our service providers. Going back to your original question, one of the other trends that we've seen, particularly in multifamily management, is outsourcing. 30 years ago, we all had housekeepers and painters and whatnot on staff. And since over the last 20 years or so, we pretty much outsourced all of that. So, but those people are very much involved in our day-to-day resident experience or tenant experience. So ensuring that they share your corporate values become very, very important. So I would say that's one of the most important aspects of finding the right people.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, like, again, it's been a topic for us that it's always having to try and find people that align with your core values and your vision, while also maintaining the ability to fill those roles. So it's a juggling act for sure all the time.
Yep.
Moving on to another question that I found super interesting when sort of reading up on you, was that you're an expert witness. Now, I had no idea what that meant, so I just wanted to hear you kind of explain sort of what is an expert witness in our industry, and kind of what does that entail?
Sure. Well, I'm sure you've seen an episode of Law and Order, right?
Of course.
So, you get the medical examiner or the pathologist or the doctor or the ballistics expert on the stand, and they get asked all these questions about the crime scene. Well, it's actually no different. I just am an expert in what's called the standard of care in property management. And so anytime there's a legal dispute, ranging from a partnership dispute, from a slip and fall or premises liability, to fires, insurance subrogation, anything having to do with the built environment, where the management of that built environment had something to do with the dispute, I get called in to basically provide my opinion on the situation. And some of the most interesting cases have been an individual who ran his own properties, who very sadly was hit by a truck, and I had to create an evaluation on what his annual the value of the work that he did, so an actuary could create a value on his life for the claim, which is kind of horrible, but it was a really interesting kind of experience. I do a lot of premises liability. So for those property managers that are listening, every time you have a slip and fall or things like that, I work for both plaintiffs and respondents, but, be careful, look at your risk management and your premises liability standards and make sure that you're following through with them, because I'm the guy that ends up having to give an opinion on that. And I see lots of mistakes in property management, and it informs me as a manager myself. And I've often had cases where I'll go back to my team and say, all right, are we doing this too? Because I can see where this property manager screwed up and it's ended up in litigation or a lawsuit or a claim of some sort. And then
I'm sure it's like a great learning tool.
It's a tremendous learning tool. And listen, and in 30 years, I've made a lot of mistakes. And I think because of those mistakes, it's what makes me good at what I do now, because we learn from our mistakes. This way, at this point in my career, I get to learn from other people's mistakes, which is great.
No better way to learn than, looking at somebody else.
Exactly. And it's an interesting part of our business that I fell into. I'm not surprised you didn't know it existed, because there's maybe 30 or 40 of us in the entire country. This past weekend, I just came back from a conference of expert witnesses, of which 80%, 90% are doctors. Again, that Law and Order type of situation, malpractice suits. But there were 4 of us from the real estate world that were there to kind of learn about the process and whatnot. So if you're interested in, after a lifetime career, it's an interesting way to continue in being involved in your business.
Yeah, definitely. So, and now, is that something that you personally do, or is that something like Oculus will actually provide? Like, if you need an expert witness, like, you can come to us?
Yeah, no, it's Oculus. It runs through Oculus. I am the expert. I do have a support team that works through. It's like running a legal practice. You read through depositions and organize files and have to do the billing and everything like that. But I'm the guy that writes the reports and do the depositions, and seldom, but occasionally have to do courtroom testimony.
Wow. Yeah, that's super cool. I mean, I know you kind of touched on it already, but is there any other stories? I'm sure, like, you've been doing this for a while, like, you had to have seen some crazy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, I've dealt with those who have been harmed or died because of conditions on buildings and things like that. I actually really don't like dealing with those very much. But it reminds one as an operator, and again, to all the listeners of the podcast, we have a lot of responsibility as property managers. People are in our space all the time, so it behooves us to make sure that our spaces are designed well and then are maintained well, because it's a big part of what we do. I'm a very active member of the Institute of Real Estate Management, better known as IREM. And there's a lot of best practices that IREM has provided, as well as BOMA and NAA on the commercial and the residential side. And so I do suggest that managers take a look at that. It is a profession. A lot of people think that anybody can be property managers. It's about collecting rent and clearing the toilets. It's a lot more than that. And frankly, because people don't know that, keeps me very busy as an expert witness.
Yeah, I think that's like a great point to kind of like end off on, where it's like at the end of the day, you are servicing and taking care of tenants and residents and people who actually like live there. So it's
Correct.
like you said, it could just be a job to some people, but like these are people's lives, and where they live and how safe they are kind of matters. So I think that is kind of cool that you kind of uphold that and make sure that people sort of have to live up to a certain standard.
Yeah, and it goes back to one of your original questions about who's involved in the industry and how to recruit. You have to have people who have what I call spirit of service. Yes, you can be very interested in the built environment on the physical aspects, engineering, building systems, but at the end of the day, we have a built environment because people work in them, live in them, play in them, eat in them, things like that. And so it's our responsibility to make sure that that they remain in good condition. And you need somebody who shares that attitude.
Awesome. I couldn't have said it better myself. David, that's all the time we have today. Where can people reach you?
I can be reached at KD Meit, MEIT, at oculusrealty.com. Happy to answer any questions. I love educating and chatting, talking shop with my colleagues.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. Everybody, this has been Plan's 10-minute podcast. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share. We appreciate everybody who listened, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.